Hi folks, it's Steve here again, doing a little shade tree mechanic work. Kind of bit off more than I could chew this morning, I think. I've got a 2001 Chev Tahoe with a 5.3 V8 with the heavy-duty towing package, and I thought it was a heavy-duty transmission, but I've learned it's a 4L60E, which is not the heavy one that would be mated with the 6-liter Chev engine, which would be the 4L80E. So anyway, this is the 4L60. And the first problem I encountered was when I went to buy the automatic transmission filter, and I was asked, is it a deep pan or a shallow pan? And I don't know, it didn't say on it. And I did quite a bit of reading on the web, and what I could find was people that say that the pan has a step up, like obviously this is the inside of the pan, I've got it off, that say that this is a step up, and on the underside of this would be a cross member for your exhaust, I guess. I'm hearing people call that a deep pan. And anyway, so that's what people say is a deep pan. There are a lot of people that don't seem to know, and I don't claim to be the expert, but I've seen many articles that say, oh, if it's four-wheel drive, it's got to be a deep pan, or if it's got the heavy-duty towing package, it has to be a deep pan, or if it's a 2000 or if it's a 99 and 97 and newer, it has to be a deep pan. And I've had in the same threads, I've seen other people post and say, well, I've got a four-wheel drive and I have the shallow pan. And anyway, there's a bunch of. The only thing that seems to be consistent is people say that this lip tells you that it's a deep pan. So I thought I'd just measure it for you. And there we go. It looks to be about 3 inches. Kind of hard to see from the camera there. To me, it looks just about at the 3-inch mark. Deep. That's at the deep end of the pan. And I saw one guy who said the shallow pan was 2 1/4 inches deep, and the deep pan was 2 7/8 inch deep. And I'm calling this 3, so I guess I would agree with that guy that would say this is a deep pan. Now, you got a magnet here that picks up junk, and you get the drain plug here. And this drain plug, I believe, was 15 millimeter. I was very fortunate and got mine out. Most people that try and get that out have a great deal of difficulty and it strips. And so what I read one smart guy did was he put a ratchet on the bottom of it with a 6-point socket. Don't try this with a 12-point socket or a 12-point box end wrench. 6-point socket, and then while it was still in the vehicle, he put a jack underneath the ratchet and put some pressure on it, and he said he even, like he didn't lift the vehicle of course, but he put, you know, quite a bit, enough to even raise the vehicle on its springs, and that's how he got it out. So anyway, that's my pan. Alright. The real nuisance here is the way that GM designed the shifter selector bracket. And in some vehicles, when you pull the transmission pan bolts off, the shift bracket comes out. Well, not so here. This crazy, stupid thing. I don't even think I'm doing a good job with the camera, but anyway, you can just listen to me. There's this silly bracket right here that holds the shift cable. And there's where it shifts, right there. And the instructions say to detach it right here and take the 2 bolts that are up here holding that bracket on, and they're actually T40 bolts. I've seen some, they're Torx bolts, T40 size, and I saw one guy who said they were T35s, which is terrible because they're just asking to strip it with a T35. Anyway, it is T40 on my truck anyway. And what I did, I actually bent, I won't even probably be able to find it now. Is this it? No, it's not that. Anyway, I actually bent my T40 socket. It's not straight anymore. I thought it was going to actually twist off. Those darn bolts are in there so tight, I could not get them off. Anyway, what I ended up doing is I gently bent this bracket away from the transmission house, the transmission cover, so that I could get it off. I really feel sick about doing that bending. It's poor practice, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say it, but I've heard about other people doing it, and that's exactly how I had to do it. So I bent it, and in fact, in order to get enough room to work there, I had to detach my front drive shaft. Strangely enough, the bolts that hold the front drive shaft on are 11 millimeter bolts heads. Feels like a 10 will go on, and my Chev quarter ton had 10s, but these are 11 millimeter bolts, so I don't know what brainiac thought of that, but that's it. And while I'm down here, again, you probably can't see it, but this shift cable goes into a box that has has 2 electrical connectors on it. Those buggers are crazy glued in there. you won't get those out unless you break something. And so anyway, I'm sorry about that if somebody needs to replace that. But I read somewhere online that GM Loctited, or that's not the right word, but super glued them in there, and I believe that to be true because I tried to get the top connector off, and I felt I was going to fracture the whole housing. Anyway, the good news is those connectors don't have to come off to do the transmission fluid filter, but yeah, it's a real pain. Now, the next problem I got here is I read online that if you're not careful when you take this pan off, you can fracture the solenoids. And here are two solenoids, and this one is very rigid in its housing. This one, you can see I can move it a little bit, and I'm not pulling on it very hard, but I can wiggle it back and forth. And I hope I didn't, but maybe I broke that, I guess, when I was taking the pan off. I don't think so. Another guy I read online, he had disconnected one of these by mistake when he pulled his pan cover off. It hooked on one of these connectors. That's not my problem. Anyway, have a look at this, and if anybody knows if that amount of play is normal, you can actually see the little hook right in there that locks that in there. That moves too, so I don't know. Anyway, I'm really hoping it's okay, and I'm not going to mess around with it anymore. But if anybody on the web is a transmission expert and they have some advice about whether that play is normal, I'd love to know, and hopefully your transmission filter job is easier than mine. Oh, last thing, I'm going to fill it up, put the pan back on, all that stuff, and then I'm going to disconnect the line from the radiator and hopefully pump the torque converter, all the old fluid out, and keep pumping it out until clean fluid comes out my hose. And of course, I don't want to run the tranny dry, so I'll stop it every liter or so and top up the transmission in between, sessions of pumping it out. I've read online that these GMs need a special tool to disconnect the rad connection for the transmission line. I guess I'll figure that out when I get there. I haven't looked that far yet, but just heads up, you might need a special tool. Okay, good luck with your project.